I know there'll be folks hopping in from the waiting room and from other calls and from the inevitable 8 hours of Zoom we all do every day. So glad y'all are here with us, though. We have a great panel to talk about virtual events, their experience with virtual events.
Lisa, you told him not to come home. You go somewhere to the floor.
For what?
There we go. So we have a few questions that we'll start with, but we'll also definitely have time for y'all's questions. So if you want to chat any questions you have at any point, feel free. And we'll also save some time at the end today for that as well. But we're going to go around first and just do some introductions. So we'll have our panelists just introduce themselves, their organization, just briefly kind of what they do. And then we'll get into their experience with virtual events and some of the questions that folks have submitted ahead of time. So I'll go ahead and have our panelists introduce themselves. Jill, do you want to kick us off?
Sure. Hi, everybody. My name is Jill Rosenberg, and I am a consultant. My work is really in the virtual events and workshop space. So I bring knowledge of the technology and the platforms and what's going on in virtual land together with good storytelling to create good experiences.
Great. Marisa?
Hi, my name is Marisa Stubbs. I'm the Development and Communications Director at Critical Exposure. So probably like many of you, just figuring out the best ways to engage external audiences to your organization and make sure that they stay committed to your mission.
Great. And Devin?
Hello, my name is Devin Donaldson, and I'm the Director of Development of Aspire After School Learning. And so, like everyone, just trying to keep everyone engaged and learn about our organization. Many of us are kind of hyper local, but also trying to maybe extend some of that reach in a virtual environment, which was maybe challenging before.
And I'd love to kind of start with just maybe telling us a little bit about the virtual events you've hosted, or I know Jill, maybe some high level about the types of events you've helped organize. But yeah, would love to hear from you all kind of what you've done, and then we'll get into some specific questions.
I'll go ahead and hop in first. We've really only done like two kinds of events. The first one was pretty early on, into about 2 months into COVID. It was the virtual version of our spring event. So really it was like a community event fundraiser, kind of celebrating the end of our program year. It's always one of our biggest events during the year. And so we put that into a virtual format that was an online exhibit, an online photo exhibit, and a conversation, a youth panel conversation that we facilitated. And then the other event that we've done is a new series that we've kicked off, a stewardship series called Critical Conversations, where we're picking some themes and exploring those with like a small curated group of folks, because it's a bit of a lower lift for us, and helps with some of the intimacy that folks kind of have known us for.
Happy to go next. We started out very small with our virtual events. The first event that was canceled for us last year was our donor appreciation breakfast. It was the first time we were hosting that. So it was kind of a bummer to have to cancel that last year. So we just started out with a virtual coffee just to bring everyone together and check in on how everyone was doing, and also try to give our supporters a look at what virtual programs look like for us. It was kind of hard for them to picture. So that was how we got things started. And with the success of that, we have continued. We actually have 3 of them today as part of our COVID impact report day. And the other big event we did was our annual fall fundraiser, which we had switched to a virtual event.
All right, so high level. I have had the opportunity to partner with some most incredible organizations on all different types of fundraising events, and a lot of fundraisers. I think that's been a big priority in terms of larger scale events for folks, is like, well, we need to keep our doors open during this time as we're figuring this out. And so those have shown up as live events and panels, and pre-recorded events that are focused on compelling folks to the mission and the goals of an organization and telling them the story of an organization. And also some of the more like some that are more like of a entertainment show variety, where it's like we have a centerpiece experience for everybody to be a part of. And then we'll tell bits of what we're doing around that. So that's been some of the fundraising work that I've done. And then a lot of learning. How do we take workshops and experiences? There are a lot of folks who were training and delivering content in person who have said, well, I want to keep doing what I'm doing. How do I translate that to the virtual space? And so that has been live workshopping, taking live work and turning it asynchronous and making it compelling, all of those pieces. And then also experimenting with all kinds of weird platforms, and very grateful to all of my family for their sacrifices in trying out some weird stuff. So I've seen some virtual networking platforms and like pretend you're on an island and your head is a camera, like some weird stuff out there, and gotten to play around in a lot of those spaces too.
Yeah, we thought about doing the island format today, but just, we decided to go with the traditional Zoom panel instead. So we'd love to hear kind of, I think the first question folks had, and this has changed over time. So, may remind us a little bit about when your event was, or Jill, from your perspective, maybe if you've seen this shift a little bit, I'd be curious. But for recruitment, how did you all go about kind of getting folks to sign up for your event? Was it largely, I know both of Marisa and Devin, you talked about maybe some smaller curated, so maybe you had a list, right, you were going out to, first like emailing everybody, maybe social media, Eventbrite, I'm not sure. So I would love to hear from you all kind of what did you do for recruitment, what seemed to work there?
Happy to go. We cast a wide net when we first did our virtual coffee, and we had thought about making it more curated, but we ended up really liking the variety of people that were on the event. So we had community partners on there, and donors and volunteers, even teachers from our school partners. So I think that variety made the questions more interesting, and it just kind of gave like a wider view of everything that Aspire does. And we ended up really liking that. And then moving forward, though, we have hosted a few smaller kind of virtual events. One was like a alumni reunion with our former board members, which was so easy to do virtually, as opposed to in person. So I think that was great. And then what I saw with our fall event is not every event kind of works for everybody. So depending on your demographics of your donors, their age, some of them appeal to a big virtual fundraiser, some of them do not. So I felt like we kind of skewed a little younger for our main fundraiser, but we were able to connect with those same supporters in the other formats that they felt more comfortable with.
I would say similar to Devin, particularly sort of within the curated event, like casting wider net, like knowing that we wanted to have, if we wanted to have 50 people, we needed to probably reach out to 4 times as many folks, right? And so what we did was we said, who of this, if we're sort of picking an area, like here are 200 people that we know kind of fit this, or 250 folks who kind of fit this demographic. And then we would expect that like maybe 50 of them would show up, right? And that is true no matter what kind of event you're doing. You send it out to a lot of folks and you know that not everyone's going to be able to make it. And then what we did for our critical conversations, what we did with those were, then we did some follow-up with, like, specifically with the folks that we knew we wanted to be in the room. And part of it was, did you get it? Did it go to your, did it go to your spam and those sorts of things? I mean, people are just really getting inundated with so many events. I mean, I know I don't check my personal email as often as I did before. I mean, everyone's just ready to get off their screens at the end of the day, right? And so some of it was the more targeted, like, let's call this person, let's just find out, like, did you even know about it? But then that was also helpful when we didn't, like, sometimes you can make up your own story about why you're not hearing back from people. And then to hear back from them to hear them say, oh, well, we just can't make it, but will you send a video afterwards? Like, are you planning to record it? We'd love to make it, but since we can't, since this conversation is about X, can you still make time to follow up with me after? And then that's very encouraging for us, because then we know it's not just that people are ghosting us. It means that people, they really want to be engaged, and they're not able to find the time. And that makes sense. I mean, people, again, are just ready to hop off their screens and not be bound to technology, to just be fully healthy during this time. The first event that we did, though, our photo exhibit, which again was early June last year. And so it was right after, right, it's like the third or fourth large murder, right, of Black folks by police, right? And people were like, right, and this is because the third, like, right, this was the big one. It was George Floyd's, right? But it's just like, our community was already like upset, because it had been, like, there'd been Ahmaud Arbery, there had been Breonna Taylor, there had been right, there had already been other folks, and then George Floyd happened, and then everything blew up. And people wanted to hear, we didn't realize this, but people wanted to hear from us, because our work is really rooted in race equity. And it's also working with young people who are working on race equity, right? And so we didn't realize that there were folks who wanted to hear from us and hadn't heard about what was going on from this perspective. And so our event was called Life on Lockdown. Young people in our programs named it. And they were like, we're exploring the twindemic, right? We're exploring COVID and what our experience has been under COVID. And we're exploring like our feelings about like the interaction between police and Black folks in this country, and how that shows up in our communities and how that shows up in our schools. And people realize, like, we haven't heard from young people about this. We had a partner who was supposed to do, I'm getting to the recruitment part, but we had a partner who was they were going to put it on their platform. And in order for folks to register, like, we had to have the link. They got really pulled into a lot of the photography response. And so we didn't hear from them for like 2 weeks. And so we didn't have a link to send out. And we had to pivot internally. We got the links and everything up, and because we were like, can we still do this? We're not even sure. Everything, and it felt like it was falling through, and our team pulled it together. Within 4 days, we got over 200 RSVPs on social media alone. And then just like with our outreach, not on social media alone, but just through digital outreach, putting it on social media, putting it on, putting it through our newsletters, and just our, whatever our digital platforms were at the time. And a lot of new people connected with us in that way. And so there are folks who know that this is what happens with critical exposure during the spring. But I also think we were able to kind of, because of who we are in the moment that we were in, there were a lot of folks who just wanted to be part of a conversation. So that was long, sorry.
I think, Marisa, I think you pointed to a lot of really important things, like what I want to tease from what both of you said that I think is so valuable is, first of all, like figuring out who that audience is such an important first step. Like, who do you want in the room and why? Because once you know the answer to that question, then the next step is to figure out where they are, right? Where are we going to find them? And how are we going to make it as easy as possible for those people to say yes? And so, like, Devin, to your point about what's the right event for the right person, and also like how easy is it to register and how easy is it to find you? Like, if your audience is on social media, blasting your inbox isn't going to get you anywhere. So asking yourself those questions and then targeting those efforts to where you can find your people is right on. And to know what's going to draw them in the moment. Like, Marisa, that's exactly what you were talking about, right? Is like, what do people need in this moment, and how are we going to phrase our outreach to speak to that? And then the last thing that, like, I'd be remiss if not to say out loud is like the funnel from how many people you reach to how many people register, and then to how many people actually show up, because it just keeps getting narrower. And so, and I think the industry average is like in the 40% to 50%. of how many people register to how many people you're actually going to see in the room. So like folks should know those expectations going in, and you may exceed them, and like good on you. But if you don't, it's not because you're necessarily doing something wrong. It's just the reality of when you have to get dressed and go somewhere, like there's some psychological investment that's happening there. Clicking on a screen is a lot easier to in the moment. Honestly, forget, decide you're not up for it. Like the ways to pass are so much easier. So having those expectations in front of you, I think also is right on. So that's what I got.
Yeah, and I'd be curious, first, Jill, just from that last piece, having had a hand in a lot of these events probably over the whole year at this point, have you seen that attendance shift at all? You know, we've definitely have heard from partners early on, you know, like Marisa was talking about, like the first few months there, right? A lot of engagement for a lot of our partners, especially because just folks had nothing else to do, right? When it was like severe lockdown, and B, there was just a lot of engagement on what's happening in the community, what's going on, not just because of like, you know, racial injustice and COVID, because folks weren't out there and they were curious what's happening to the organizations I love, the clients I care about, all that. Have you seen that shift at all, or hold pretty steady in your opinion?
I mean, there's some real fatigue. That's like a larger, I don't like the word zeitgeist, but it's the word that's coming to mind, reality. That we've been at this a long time and we're tired. And if the thing is compelling for the moment in the right way, people are still going to show. If it like a bad time, like I don't have the time right now, or I don't feel the energy for this, right? Like the event that is the tell the story and compel the people to the experience, everybody's got so much bandwidth for that event. Everybody's got so much bandwidth for the event where it's like the concert with the musician, right? Once you've seen one, like you get filled up on these things. And so that, I don't mean to cop out on you, Matt, but it comes back to like, what are your people looking for right now? What's missing? Where are the gaps? Where can you fill a need that they have in this moment? That will compel them to participate, because we're consuming content all the time. But long before this moment where we didn't have anywhere to go, we were consuming content all the time. So some of it is about now, and a lot of it I think is not actually.
Definitely, yeah, and a good push to kind of maybe even think more about how we're making sure our events are purposeful, but that people will still show if they find it interesting. That's great. And then Devin and Marisa, I'm not sure you know, how many events you've done recently or stuff, or how you can compare it to. I know some of the events, especially Devin, I think that you're doing, you weren't doing before in person, but I'd love to know just how has attendance felt compared to what it used to be, right? Like if we remember back to like 2019 and stuff, do we feel like it sounds like in some cases the events maybe are even more well attended than they used to be, but how does that feel like comparative for y'all?
I'll hop in. The virtual event that we did last year was it was roughly, I would probably say about like maybe 50 less people. You know, we normally, I think we get like 200, 250 folks. And I feel like we were sort of like 175-ish in terms of like folks who hopped on that event last year. And then the critical conversation that we've never done events like that before, just in terms of what does it mean to, well, yeah, it feels like this was a special thing for like kind of a special moment. And so it's hard to compare it to like a small donor event or a small, like it feels very different. So it's hard to know what I would compare it to.
Definitely.
You know, again, with some of our smaller events, we didn't have those opportunities before. We kind of created some new best practices, I think, as an organization that were a great learning opportunity. We did used to host open houses. And so it's going to be great when we can get people back in, but that's a big time commitment. It's, challenging. So I think having that sort of hybrid model where you have consistent virtual opportunities for people to connect and to learn about your organization, but also hopefully we'll be able to start welcoming people back into our spaces at some point. And I think they'll be excited to see that. So I think thinking it from that standpoint, but from our large fundraising event, we had substantially more donors, over double the number of donors than in the past. But we really tried to hit our goal before the event because we really weren't sure what that live attendance would look like. And that was sort of our icing on the cake moment. And so that did very well, but we really kind of had to have very limited expectations about what the live event part could look like when that was maybe such a big part of the event before.
Definitely. Well, and especially that kind of hitting the goal ahead of time, right? A big part of that is sponsors. So I want to pivot a little bit to top of that because I know we have a lot of questions from folks about just like what our partnerships with event sponsors have looked like, right? Like how have we kept them involved? And some folks have shifted them to just being more programmatic donors. Some have kept them as event sponsors. Some have kind of paused. So I guess if you all can talk a little bit about just how did you engage maybe pre-existing sponsors? And did it look kind of the same as usual, different? What did they get out of it possibly? If you talk to them about that, would love to hear about that.
We saw most of our sponsors come in at the same level as last year. I think this year was sort of trying to, just shepherd that partnership through these kind of tumultuous times. And so now this time of year, I'm starting those conversations with them to see what's changed. Many sponsors have different funding priorities. So making sure we still fit into that and our good partnership is important. But then also thinking things through. We don't have the volunteer opportunities maybe we would normally have. So that's kind of an impact. And then also, what does our event look like in the fall? Like, do we have a watch party? Is there how do they, reach our audience also? So I think that they're pretty much, in our case, holding relatively steady, but each one's really kind of an individual relationship, but really trying to communicate with them throughout the whole year so that they feel part of the whole year as opposed to maybe just being event specific.
So we made some intentional decisions around our spring event. It was a conversation that actually started before we went into COVID. And it was really this question around who is this event for? And because staff decided, young people decided, even a board decided that this opportunity is for young people. It's for their friends. It's for their families. It's for them and their community. And we don't want someone's stamp on that event at all. And so we made very specific decisions around what we would take corporate money for that was event related. And there was a very clear decision that around our fall fundraising event, we would do it around that. We could do it around some other specific things and initiatives, but that we really felt like Spring Exhibit belonged to the community. And so we ultimately decided that we weren't pursuing corporate money for that. And it also became sort of post-event, one of the reflections that we did on the event was, given the fact that there were so many statements around Black Lives Matter, and our staff is mostly Black, and our staff was really kind of mad at all these people who were like, there's nothing substantial around any of your what you're writing and around any of your statements. And we were just like, we don't really care about your statement. I mean, congratulations that you put one out and all those sorts of things. But we did not want to be the people that folks decided that they wanted to align with simply to make themselves feel better or look better. It was like, our likeness is not for sale in this moment, right? Or not ever, but particularly in this moment. And so given what the event was, we kind of looked back on that and we were like, yeah, it's great that we didn't align with anyone, because we want to do we want to be more intentional about who who our partners are. And we're looking at this on a lot of levels, not just with sponsors, but also with funding. Like, who are we aligning ourselves with, and where is this money coming from, and what is it truly doing in the community? And so again, that was work that started before our spring event last year, but it continues. It continues to be one of the questions that we raise going into our next spring event. But what we ended up doing last year, because we couldn't do that work that normally brings in these big dollars, is we started experimenting with community sponsorship. And so what does it mean to ask different groups in the community, and like say at levels that we would normally say, oh, this is a lower level, to still give some of the same kind of accolades and appreciation, and assign the same kind of, like, and say, these are our equity sponsors, and these are our justice sponsors, and these are folks from the community. This is what makes our work go. And so we'll continue to flesh that out for our spring event. But if we want it to truly be a community event, then what does it mean to sort of set up opportunity for everyone to be able to participate in that? And also wanted to say that also connects to like how you even recruit people, and how you talk about who's helping you host and who the event committee is. And a lot of times we do that around what dollars people can bring in. And our event committees and our host committees, we're actually, for our spring event, we're transforming that and saying, what new people can you bring into the community? And it's not necessarily about money, but who do you feel needs to know about this work and bring their energy, and the kind of energy that we're looking for and the kind of partnerships that we're looking for, bring those folks, and we don't care about money. And that allows us to then be a little bit more clear about who's on the host committee, and it's not just based on dollars. And then we can build the kind of energy and experience that feels good for everyone. And so the donor isn't centered, the donor is part of a community that makes the work happen.
Definitely. That's great. All of that. Jill, I don't know if you, in some of your platforms, have just seen anything creative or anything you wanted to share about, obviously, like the typical sponsored benefits, right? We're recognition, right? We're putting their name on the agenda, right, or something. But I know at least on some of the platforms you work on, there might be some other options. Have you seen anyone do anything creative there around sponsorships?
Yeah, so I think it's worth noting that most of these platforms were built they do a lot of work to serve nonprofits, but they were built for corporate purposes. And so a lot of the ways they offer sponsorship perks, I think what I've actually learned in partnering with most of my clients is that a lot of those perks, that's not why our sponsors are in it, right? Like, they're not looking for clicks and collecting lists and getting data and insights. That's not why people are sponsoring these events. I think a lot of what you said, Marisa, was really insightful in terms of the authenticity, and what you said, Devin, about building these relationships. So yeah, there's some cool stuff out there, and I'm actually not so sold on what it's bringing to the table, because the reasons that folks are sponsoring are the mission-driven answers, which, like, I think is actually what we want. What I would say is, depending on what your sponsors do want, right? If they are looking for an opportunity and it fits with the work that you're doing to share their support in a particular way, or to articulate why it matters to them, if those are pieces that they're looking for, that there are more ways to do that other than giving time from your event away. And I think that's because it's the most obvious and it's the easiest to access and what we're most familiar with. That's what people are asking for. And I think at an in-person event, you'd almost never, right? You'd almost never be like, now we'll invite each of the sponsors up to the stage, right? So you wouldn't, doing that in a virtual event makes about as much sense, and I think feels like it fits about as well. And so there are a lot of ways to mimic the way we think about highlighting, appreciating, valuing our sponsors virtually as you would do in person. To answer your question, Matt, I think the most creative way I've seen this done is actually in the trail up to the event, where sponsors have had the opportunity to sort of share their connection to the organization, and it actually supports the event because it's a marketing effort. Also, that I think has been the most aligned with what the sponsors have wanted and what the organization values also, while leaving space for the event to shine on its own.
Yeah, no, that makes a lot of sense. That's great. So we have a couple other kind of logistics questions, and we'll get into kind of the content, kind of the heart of the events y'all have done. So a couple of logistics. One, this is a quick one, and I think I can guess the answer for some of the events y'all have talked about. But did you all charge for attendance? Was a question we got from a few folks ahead of time that we wanted to ask.
I'll just give my general take and then I'll hear what y'all have to say. My general take is that when you have a ticket price, as opposed to a donation, a ticket means that you bought something. So I think generally what I'd say is if you're going to put a ticket price on it, it's because people expect they're going to get something in exchange. And I know you might ask us, Matt, about like, what are you if you're sending people stuff, swag, food, whatever, then yeah, it makes sense to have a ticket price attached to that. To just charge a ticket price in order to show up, I think that feels hard, that navigating that is harder for folks. I don't think it quite matches up. That's been my experience overall.
Great.
Yeah, no, no ticket sales. Critical Conversations was free, and then the spring event was with suggested donation.
So we might be different. We did. Well, it depends on the event. So for our virtual coffees, those are free. Those are informative, relationship building opportunities. There's no ask. So that's just a great outreach opportunity. And then for our fall event, we did have a ticket because at the time we still had no timeline on knowing when are we going to be back in person. And so, typically people would buy a ticket to the events. We kind of wanted to keep that feel going since we had set kind of records the year before in attendance, and we didn't want to lose that momentum. But one thing we came up with that I thought was creative is that you typically get food for your event, right? You have ambiance, you have drinks, there's an experience that goes with it. And so for our early bird ticket holders that got an event ticket typical to what would be an event ticket, price for in person, we paid a meal forward back to one of our families. So it sort of had that like feel of like there's a meal involved and it has this event feel, but it went back to the people that we're serving. And we had really great success with that. And I definitely think that we'll continue that even for when we have in-person events. If people make a donation, they can't attend, but maybe they want to share their meal with a family because they can't make it that year. I think that there's some creative ways that you can kind of build up that experience.
Definitely, yeah, and that even being mission aligned to the ticket price there is a great example of how to infuse those values into our event. So that's great. Another kind of just purely logistical one that the few folks sent out ahead of time. Just when during the week or day did you hold these events? Right, like we used to have some pretty set parameters of like we hold our event at 6 because people got out of work at 5 and had to go home and change it, like or whatever. And now that we're all just on our couch all the time, like a little more open to when those could happen. So when did you all hold yours, and any thought that went into that, or Jill, maybe from your perspective, any trends you're seeing there about attendance or things like that?
I've seen breakfasts, brunches, lunches, coffees, dinners, after dinners, all of it. It's really about your people, when they're available, when are they going to show up? Like, are you, and considering their factors, right? Are you dealing with an audience that needs to put kids to bed? Are you dealing with an audience that their connection to your organization happens primarily during their work day? All of those factors. I have seen almost no events on the weekend. I will say that there's almost none of that happening, that I think that there has been this unspoken reservation of weekend for not this. And I have many more feelings about the length of time that an event is as opposed to when during the day it's happening, and every second has to have a purpose, because everything's a TV show now, right? If anybody who's on this call who knows me already has heard that line, like everything's a TV show, and why should I watch I've got Netflix, like why should I watch your TV show?
That's great.
Yeah, I will. When you said no, Joe, when you said no weekends, it just took me back to a conversation when we were thinking about doing these critical conversations at our office and or not even at our office, but like within our staff. And someone just threw the idea out of like, well, like here's some times, here's the time, here's the time. And someone threw out, I don't even know who it was, of saying, well, like maybe we can do like a Saturday brunch time. And everyone was like, no. Like it just died. Like it just like it was dead on arrival. Like nobody, like no one would even entertain it. And it wasn't even the question of like, are people available? You were like, we are not available. Like we ourselves refuse to show up to do that. And so that was a very key thing. So we've done our spring event that we did last year. I think it was like 6 to 7. It was around like 6 to 7. And then the critical conversations that we've done, we've really just done like this 5 to 6 period, and then like a 12 to 1 period, and like really marketed like, you know, have lunch with us, or like kind of like be with us on your lunch break. So like an opportunity for you to like kind of get out of doing this and like do something that's a little more fun with us and like talk to us. So those are some of the ways, but we have been very, very clear that we will only make it last an hour. And that we're not trying to be on camera longer than that.
We actually have an interesting experiment going today. So funny enough about this question, we, for the first time, offered multiple times to join us for one of these 30-minute kind of cultivation events that we host. So we had one at 10 and noon, and then I have one after this at 4. And our most signups were for the 4 o'clock. But we had the most absentees from registering at our lunch time. And then the people that registered for the breakfast, it was a smaller group, but they all attended. You know, they were very punctual. So it'll be kind of an interesting experiment, but we kind of realized like offering 2 times maybe in the future might be great, like afternoon and morning, just depending on people's schedule and life and work. So
Devin, it's interesting that you say that. We did that. We've done that also with our kind of critical conversations that we're doing. And as another sort of point to pay attention to is kind of like the energy. And so we found more people at the 5 o'clock hour, but there was more energy for us in the noontime. And so what happens as the day goes on. And so all of our questions around like getting people engaged and like being in the chat and respond with emojis and what are your questions and those sorts of things, there was almost none. In like the 5 o'clock time, like people were just there to spectate. And during the lunchtime, like everybody still had a lot of energy to engage. And so that was very interesting for us to see.
that's a great point. I look forward to seeing what happens at 4 now. I might be prompting them, like, please submit your questions.
Just get them in early before they get too close to that 5 o'clock time, you know. No, that's great. And that's a really good example. I think what we've seen most of I think the biggest shift would be that we have seen some more breakfast and lunches, right? Which happened every now and then in person, but not often just because of the logistics of it. And then the evening events being a little bit earlier. So whereas maybe we would have had like a 7 o'clock start, now we're like 7 o'clock, that's way too late. Like, so we've seen those shift to more like 6 o'clock or things like that. Great. And then the second question that folks did have, and this gets a little bit to programming, but since you all kind of hinted at it and Jill brought it up, for length of event, you know, there's a big question about the fact that, you know, for in-person events, especially for a fundraiser, right? Those used to be all evening affairs, right? Probably a minimum of 3 hours. That obviously we're not doing that, or hopefully we're not doing that in the virtual space. But how we still, you know, to make the event meaningful, we also don't want to, you know, do something that feels like folks aren't getting everything out of it they want to. So how did you all think about timing? And then maybe Jill, just kind of what are you seeing in terms of kind of most common for timing? I'll start. I'll go through. Devin, maybe if you want to tell us just a little bit about how long your events are.
We tried to keep them as short as possible. I think that we're all tired. It's been a long year. So our virtual kind of chats and coffees, 30 minutes. We really try to wrap it up at 30 minutes. People follow up questions, then we reach out to them afterward and kind of have that one-on-one conversation if we need to. And for our fundraising or event, it was the goal to be shutting it down at 45 minutes, and we got very close to that. So, I think that kept it snappy and kept the energy going, because I think that's like one of the things Marisa talked about, that evening energy. Everyone's tired. So like having a long event, it's very hard to sustain energy, especially virtually, for a long period of time. And so, this has sort of been the new era of like short and sweet events, depending on their purpose.
Great. Marisa?
I feel like I gave it away in the last question of like saying that we do our events, and then sort of like hearing like 30 minutes, 45. I was just like, well, then let's go back to the draw. Let's try a shorter event, because I'm always happy to do things that are shorter. I feel like I think given the content, I think what we're always trying to do is sort of think about like how much content we're having and like what we're doing during that time. And as we plan out things, it feels like an hour always makes most sense. But we're definitely always trying to keep the time moving and be as engaging as we can with folks, so it's not just people sitting listening the whole time.
Definitely.
So I'd say 3 things that like sort of guide my thinking here. One is that from an attention perspective, like that's a really important point. People are just really limited in terms of what they can manage, and like more so virtually, because the stimuli are less, right? Like there's not stuff going on around you. You can't in the same way lean into your friend if what's happening on stage isn't grabbing your attention. So in terms of like segments of things, if there's something for you to do, anything longer than 15 minutes before you switch up modality is usually when you're going to start to lose people. If it's frontal and it's something you're watching, I mean, we are living largely in a world of YouTube clips. So, that does govern in terms of engaging with the material. It's got to snap in that way. So, and the other thing is that I think whatever the length of time is, I don't know that there's a right answer, but whatever time you set, keep to it. Going over time, first of all, your drop off is going to be tremendous. People are just going to leave. And if the ending is important, then you're going to lose it. So it's not worth it to go over time because you miss out. And we have real feelings about when things end early right now. We like get very, very excited about it. So saying an event is going to be an hour and then having it be 50 minutes, people are like, yeah. So capitalize on those good feelings. Send your fundraising email out in that time period. Look, you have 10 extra minutes, fill this out. And then the last thing is in terms of making choices about what goes into the event when we're always trying to keep it as tight as possible. I think there are so many industries in which people get the feedback that like good creation is good editing. And I think we have to sometimes we need a buddy for that. Like doing it for ourselves is hard, but I think it's true in cooking, right? Like all those cooking shows where they're like, if you had just refined a little bit, you tried to do too much. And it's also true in like the journalism space, good writing is good editing. So I think it's true here also, is what is really most important, what's really going to achieve your goal, what do you need, and then do that stuff real well.
That's great. And takes us really into, especially on the editing piece, like the type of content we're providing. So we'll talk about kind of the actual kind of messaging in a moment. But just thinking about the actual type, right? So like, do we do it live? Is it pre-recorded? Is it a mix of both? And if it's live, is it largely kind of didactic where we're talking at them, or are we trying to kind of engage kind of peer-to-peer conversations in the space as well? Would love to hear from you all kind of how you balanced maybe that live pre-recorded. If you did do live, was it the us to them, or was it really trying to get folks talking with each other as well?
We've had success in having both content live and pre-recorded in our event. I think it's really hard. We want to tell our family stories and that of our students. It'd be really hard to get them like live on an event? What if they have issues? So we were thinking that through with the primary fundraising event we did. So a lot of that content was pre-recorded, and also with COVID, we could record it outside safely in a way that was easy. And also that then is content that you can share out after your event, because not everyone can attend live. Not everyone, some people just donate and don't plan to attend because they can't make it that evening. So having those content pieces to share out, I think, is really valuable. But I will say we had a little bit of we had a live component with our live appeal, and it was casual, like our board chair and her husband writing on a board because of the lag. If anyone's had to post an event to YouTube. And so he was like writing out the fundraising things to her, and it was like, oh, from Don's Corner, and since we're a small organization, it felt a little more personal. Like our donors know these people too, so that was a nice component when everything was also the rest of the content was pre-recorded.
For us, it's been mostly live with a recorded element. And so in the critical conversations, we had some video that we showed, particularly showing young people, during this time, what they've been up to over the last year. So there was some video that we did during that time. And then for our spring event last year, we had this space because so one of the things that we were trying to figure out is like, how do you recreate that moment for people to basically do a gallery walk, right? And like, that's the thing that really takes up most of the time at spring exhibit for us, is people just walking around and looking at the photos. And so we tried to recreate that a little bit in a couple of ways. One is we just had and we told people that we were going to do this ahead of time, is that we had about 10 minutes towards the front end where we just put the, I don't even know if it was 10 minutes. It might've been shorter than that. I can't remember, but we just had some time at the front for like people just to either go to the website where we had everything set up as a photo exhibit and they could click through on their own, or if folks weren't able to navigate away from Zoom, also set up a slideshow on Zoom for people to be able to see that, so they could see it the way that we intended the design to look like. And then for folks who didn't have access outside of Zoom, we also did that. And so that took a little bit of time. And I think we even got a couple of comments back where folks were like, oh, I wish I had a little bit more time. And then people said, oh, it would have been great to hear like young people, docent, which is what normally happens. Like, and so those are some of the things that we're trying to incorporate into this next event.
I think the question that I always ask is, if you're going to do, so whenever you do anything live, there's inherently more risk, right? Like that's true on TV also. Everywhere, anything you do live, there's more risk of what can happen. And so if you're going to do it live, then there should be a good reason, or a number of good reasons. And so that's the question I think on the table to discuss, is what's the value of doing this live? And there can be so many good answers to that. Anything from, like Devin, what you alluded to with creating that vibe of people being able to respond to what they're hearing, and or that it's people being able to react to you in real time and interact with you. If there's interactivity, like, of course, there's value to doing things live and being able to navigate that. If it's about people, if you can't answer the question, right? By the way, I should say, the question might also be, we don't have time to produce the pre-recorded content. We would like to, but we don't have the time, we don't have the resources, those are real things too. But if you don't have an answer, then I always say that pre-recorded gives you the opportunity, like from a technological perspective, it's more likely that things are going to go the way that you want them to. You're less likely to have the experience of like, Bob's trying to introduce the next segment and all of a sudden he's like on screen for 10 seconds and nobody knows what's happening. Right. So, if there's good reason to go live, if you're going to get value out of it, whatever those reasons are, get it. Otherwise, you can make it feel very live, even if you put it on video. That's the other, like, pull back the curtain point, is that a lot of things that look like they are live are not. I don't know if anybody watched the Grammys on Sunday. It looked like those performances were all happening live. They were not. Like they made to look like Trevor Noah was walking right over there and that they were live performing in they fooled you. Those performances were pre-recorded. So there's a lot you can do to make things feel live when they're not.
Yeah, little did y'all know this panel actually happened 3 weeks ago. So who knew? But jokes. Would love to hear from you all. You know, and Marisa, you're talking a little bit about this in your events, but we'd love to hear from all three of you on it. We've seen more and more audiences looking to be engaged at these events. I think early on, especially, they just wanted like good content, and that's still definitely the case. But now we're looking to maybe get their voice out there, right, or ask them questions, or have some level of interactivity, right, and more and more that sense of community, right, as much as we can make it in a virtual space. So we'd love to just hear like what you all have done to kind of get that interactivity. From maybe it's just like a really lively chat function, right? You know, breakout rooms or conversations or things that are happening before or after, but and anything that's kind of getting folks engaged, something we get a lot of questions about.
I'll just give a couple of things. One, for one of our events, it was just like, even from the front end, like just reminding people of like their social media platforms and your hashtag, like your hashtags and all those sorts of things. And just saying, if there's anything in the content that you just want to lift up, like make sure that you're using this and saying that on the front end as well as on the back end, of like how you're just getting, like people were hearing from folks other than you about how great your event was. So that's like one thing. And then the other thing that we did, particularly for, so the first two critical conversations that we did were actually around our executive transition. So we've just been in executive transition. Our founder of 16 years stepped down. Our new ED didn't come on until November 16th. And so we didn't have an opportunity during a fall fundraiser to like really introduce our new executive director to our major donors and like to our, you know, just sustaining supporters and those sorts of things. And so our first two critical conversations, that was the focus. It was really what we're calling now the executive transition edition of critical conversations. And so we had a couple of long-term supporters of our organization be a part of helping design those spaces and facilitating those conversations, so that it wasn't us doing that. It was folks who really love CE. And also we made sure that it was someone who knew both of the people. So knew our outgoing ED and knew our incoming ED, and so could figure out like, this is how I want this to look and feel, and knew some questions to ask both of them. And one of the things that one of our facilitators did was to say, share what your appreciation is for the organization, and like share that out live, right? And so it was an opportunity for our outgoing ED to sort of hear, this is what the community is holding as what has been impactful. But then it was also an opportunity for our new ED to hear, like from someone other than, you know, staff and someone other than, you know, the board, this is what your community says is important about the work and why they've continued to stay engaged. And I think that was very smart on the part of the facilitator to just kind of invite what makes you love this organization. And it just really created some good vibes. And some of them just even said, and you should call me, and you should do this, and you should do that. And so as people are kind of like sharing their own love fest, also then just said, and I'd love to connect with you about X, Y, and Z. And so that kind of created this moment where, like, you know, I'm furiously writing down like, oh, here's your plan for the next, like, here's your engagement plan for the next like 3 to 6 weeks.
Yeah, I love that like really inviting question there that folks can kind of just personalize and share and respond to. That's great.
Let's see. So from a fundraising, I guess, standpoint, depending on what type of event we're talking about, we were very happy when we found a platform that we could stream our event to, that included the live ticker. So when we were doing like the live appeal, it was live and people could see it on one page. So I think that that's sometimes where the interaction part gets complicated. Like, is someone having an experience in one place, or do they have to navigate to many different places to interact with you? and you could lose them. I think that was like our fear. Like, will they get lost? Like, did they find the right back, find us again, you know? And I mean, the technology around this has changed so much. So people could put a funny GIF or write a message with their post. People could post pictures even, you know, so that was really fun. And I enjoyed that part of the live event part. It felt live then. And then we have utilized some breakout rooms, and something that comes to mind is when we did our alumni reunion for our board members. You know, we've been around for 25 years. So there's board members that have been invested with us for a very long time and put a lot of care into our organization, and things look really different right now. So, you know, coming back and having those conversations with this group of people was great. And then we were able to put them in breakout rooms based on their service, and it kind of had like a fun celebratory kind of reunion feel, you know, and then kind of come back. So that was really great. And, you know, they want to do it again this spring. So that's fantastic. So I think it just depends on the type of event you're doing. And I think breakout rooms can be a really great opportunity for people to share and maybe meet other people on your team. So, you know, some of us are going to different rooms and they can ask questions to different people from your organization who they may not get to talk to on a regular basis, like from your program side.
That's great. And just because I know it's going to be a question in the chat, if we don't ask now, which platform were you using? So I'm sure there was some.
I'm guessing it's Give Better. It's got to be Give Better.
It was, yes. Yeah. And they also integrated with our donor management tool, which was awesome. So less database work for me is always a win in everything we choose.
Great. And Jill, yeah, would love to hear kind of some of the things you're seeing folks do to get that kind of audience engagement piece.
Yeah, I mean, you're right, Devin. Like the technology has evolved so much, like that there is a platform now that allows you to live stream within the donation platform was like a huge appearance of a thing. I think the overarching observation is to dream about, like, how might we question, right? How might we create an experience that we want to create? We want to create community. We want to give people an opportunity to share. If you start from there and then ask yourself, like, how can I make the technology go to work for me? There's so much out there. I mean, from the things that we're all familiar with, like surveys and polls and Q&As and breakout rooms, to collaborative design and creation spaces. I had somebody do an icebreaker where they were like, here's a whiteboard, post a picture that represents a period in high school where I don't know. And it was such silly, awesome fun that you would not necessarily be able to create in person. So I think it comes down to thinking about what do you want people to walk away with there, and then asking what's the best tool to deliver it, because you can use all of these spaces creatively, like using breakout rooms. Now that people can walk from breakout room to breakout room by themselves, you could create like a living museum or a gallery walk experience where people wander from place to place. And so, yeah, it's run the gamut. And I think what's beautiful is to see the creativity coming out in folks. Just recently, I saw someone who was like, we want to mimic tables, but we don't at our event, but we don't really want to have tables. It's like, we don't actually want to send people there. So they were like, what we really want to mimic is that feeling of being able to like nudge your friend while the thing is happening. So they just created WhatsApp groups for the tables. That was it. That's pretty low tech grand scheme and pretty low barrier for most folks to just create 10 WhatsApp groups of 6 people. And then those people are, because that's their vibe. Like there are other folks who are like, I don't want people doing that. They're going to be distracted. But what are you looking to get out of it? And then that's a totally free and easy solution to get the feeling that you want.
Definitely. That's great. We just have a couple more questions. So for anyone that wants to ask questions of our panelists, if you want to put them in the chat now, or we'll have some time again at the end, but you can go ahead and start asking those in the chat, and we'll transition to answering those in just a moment. So a couple of questions, 2 questions looking forward and one meta question looking back to wrap up here. So one would be, as I know some of y'all are planning events probably in the next few months that are still virtual. Knowing that, again, it's going to be a slightly different world, right? And the fact that like some folks might be vaccinated, weather gets nicer, people start going outside, right? So there might be a little bit more competition for what people are doing compared to an event we maybe hosted last spring or summer. How are you all kind of going about thinking about that or including that when you think about marketing or programming, given that kind of shifting reality outside of it?
We were just talking about this. I would love to be able to have a watch party for our event. We make a lot of pre-recorded content. There is that, like, can we make an experience where people have the opportunity to be home or in person and it both have a really great experience? I think that's kind of what we're looking for. But with that caveat in mind, it needs to be able to be easy to cancel and not a cost to cancel. It's just, we never know. So that's sort of what we're looking at now. And if it's a smaller watch party, can we utilize maybe the same spaces that we used before, but in a much reduced capacity maybe? So that's sort of what we're looking at right now, in a way that we can make something that would maybe be simple. If it's in person, just keep it simple and not overly complicated, so that the focus, because that's something we've talked about, like how do you plan 2 events then for at the same time and not getting overextended for a small team. So, just some sort of simple events where we can come back together in person is great. And I know, of course, we would love to be able to go meet up at a vineyard somewhere and, connect with even our coworkers in some social ways, or a patio somewhere. So hopefully we can get back to seeing each other a little bit more in person.
I don't know that we've gotten as fancy, Devin, as you all have gotten. I was just like a watch party. I was like, that's pretty fancy. I think that we're just I think that we're holding the tension, and I don't know that we've necessarily found any creative. We haven't found a creative solution to that. I think that it's just sort of this recognition that some people really want to be, in person, and some people have no idea when we'll be ready. Like folks are like summer, but then there are other places who are like, we're not doing anything no matter what happens until the fall, right? And so I think that there's just holding what makes for best practice in some of these things, and recognizing, like, particularly as days get longer, and how to hold the event. Like for us, I think it's really this question of how to hold the event a little bit earlier, to just let people get on with their day, right? Or get on with their evening, so that it's not leaving and then coming back to something. And I think that that's probably is the timing, at least for us, is the biggest consideration that we're trying to make in terms of the event, and then just what will make it as engaging as possible.
Definitely, that's great. Yeah, the timing is really important to think about, and I think that y'all were sharing earlier about purposeful, right? I think just the bar is even that higher, right? As both people are tired of screens, but also have other options. It just means we need to communicate that value and our values even stronger. So that's great. But I don't know if you had anything to add there, or okay.
I suspect your next question is going to be where I'm going to want to. I'm just guessing what's coming next.
So the next one is a little bit of that question about what we can kind of learn from and carry forward from these virtual events, right? So both for maintaining some virtual events, as I think you all have talked about, there's some opportunities, it feels like, for that, or for a hybrid model moving forward, or even things we learned from doing these that when we do in-person events, we'll do differently. Would love to hear from you all kind of what some of those lessons are and things that are standing out to you.
I'm just going to hop in with, because I think that this is something that we would normally do in an in-person event setting that we didn't do in our first virtual event, right? And there are a few things, right? Like in person, all the roles, and who's holding all of the roles, right? And because we've done them so often, it's very, very clear, who's where, what they're doing. You have somebody, whether you call them a showrunner or not, there's someone who's running your show, right? when we did our first virtual event, we didn't know that there needed to be someone checking the organizational email for people who couldn't get on, right? And it was like a mad scramble, like our first 10 or 15 minutes in that event, like as wonderful as it was and as great as it was, someone chatted us like to everybody saying, my friend can't get into your event. And it was like, oh crap. Like, and then we had to go off. And so like everybody knows that like this person can't get in. And then like we realized that we had probably about like 20, 30 emails of people who were having difficulty getting into the event. And some folks figured that out and some folks didn't, but like that wasn't a thing that we'd assigned to someone on the front end. And the second time that we did a virtual event, like we made sure that that was like, who's the person who's holding that job? And so what that meant is that we had to think about, like, we're a very small DEFCON team, like it's just two of us, right? And so we're doing so much, like making sure that the event is happening and running, that we even had to rethink our roles and then start recruiting additional people from staff to make sure like who's covering the chat, who is making sure that like all the questions get captured and get like if there's any of that kind of engagement, like who's doing that? Like, is that happening publicly? Is it happening privately? Like depending on how that's going, who's checking the organizational email? Do people know who to reach out to if they can't get onto the thing, right? And like just thinking about those things and then just like testing literally every feature on the platform before we used it. Like we didn't do that the first time. Like we tested some things, we thought we knew what we were doing. And now our thing is like, we will know literally everything. Like we even know like what it looks like when people register. So we have people now that are test cases for our registration to make sure that they get things the way that we want them to get it. And not even just for us being like, well, we've gotten this. It's just like, no, I want a test case like your 10 friends of the organization. What do you get when we send this out? Does this make sense to you? And so making sure that we've done that, that kind of practice has been, that has been real, those kinds of things have been really, really helpful for us. Yeah, and then I think the moving forward, like what do we want to take? We're in the same boat as when Devin talked about like, oh, this is the first time we've done these small events. We are planning like through the end of, being stay at home, continuing to do them. And we know that we will continue critical conversations in the future, some virtual, some in person, because virtual, as all of us have figured out, has allowed people to be part of, to really access content in a way that they haven't before, particularly folks who used to live in the area, no longer live or never lived, but really like your mission. Like it gives people an opportunity to engage with the content of the organization without having to like be there in person.
I second Marisa on the roles and responsibilities. Document that you're opening up all your playbook from your events in the past, and you're like, oh, this is a problem. And I will say, like, one thing I learned, it was really hard to engage your traditional kind of event volunteers when your events are virtual. You don't have someone doing all the centerpieces or running the food. And I think that was a big sense of loss for some of our volunteers. So, I really look forward to hopefully being able to engage with them on those sorts of things that they've loved and put time into over years, and everything in the future. And I felt like as the main person, kind of the point person for the event, a lot falls on you when it's virtual it's hard to delegate it and have certain parts ran because you're really that point person, making sure that everything's happening in a way that can be really stressful. And like the night of, like, gosh, I was sweating, and so nervous because we had the live parts too, and I wasn't sure if it was going to work. And it all works out, but we also just felt like that sense of perfection, we took that off of our plate. Like, we're doing the best we can. We're nonprofit professionals. We do great job at what we do. And now we're learning all these new skills and stretching ourselves in new ways. And, I think that I kind of went into it with an open heart and just kind of a sense of play with that. And I didn't have to be perfect, for it to be a great success, I guess. And then just moving forward, I think we've all heard that we needed to make videos and it was awkward. No one had time. And now it's like, I can't imagine functioning without all that video. And I'm always thinking of new ways to engage our team to get more video. I always need like B-roll footage for things, for voiceover stuff. So that's kind of really stretched our whole team creatively. And I think the more that you can engage your whole team in that process, the better.
Yeah, I think those are beautiful and important lessons. And I think we all need to give ourselves a little bit of grace for a second here, because basically what happened here is everybody ended up in a world where someone was like, here, plan your events. Oh, I'm just going to light your vendor list on fire and all of your experience and everything you know. Now go ahead. What's wrong? Is it hard? So I think that's important to acknowledge everything that everyone has accomplished. And those learnings, I mean, are so insightful, right? The value of rehearsal and practice and testing, how much it's a different kind of work. Like the hours you're talking about that your volunteers spent on preparing centerpieces are also the hours that you're spending collecting video. Like they're just different hours. But the amount of effort is still quite tremendous. And I think that was a big lesson. I think that we were all used to like, oh, we need to gather virtually. We just hop on a video call or hop on a whatever, and that's it. But to produce an experience is a whole different ball of wax. I think we learned that lesson. And I think that moving forward, I want to say pragmatically speaking for everyone, that I think this is a scalable process, that you don't have to make the whole decision right now about like, we're definitely going to be in person, we're definitely going to be online, where I would encourage everyone to look at your plan and figure out what decisions do you actually need to make right now and which ones can you hold until later, and to look closely at your contracts on all sides of it, right? What do you need to commit to now, and where can you ask for the opportunity to be flexible? Because what we've been given here is like a whole new lens through which to look at this part of our work. It's a whole new set of considerations. Like folks who are holding virtual fundraisers or virtual gatherings where they were doing those things in person might never have considered doing those things online, whereas now it might be the right choice for you. You might have realized that that's actually, it's helping in certain ways, right? The reach is a big one. So scaling the planning, and then it's a value proposition question, right? There is value to doing certain things in person, certain types of events, certain parts of event, whatever. There's value to doing certain things virtually. I mean, you both pointed to reaching folks you hadn't expected to reach, especially for organizations with reach beyond where their offices are, right? There's an opportunity for you to engage your community, to broaden who your community even is, that you might not have considered before, that might have felt impossible. So what's most important, and just for the sake of everyone sort of knowing this, I think that hybrid events are a possibility and a reality. So this virtual stuff, I don't think our goal should be to make it go away. Now, there might be a backlash for a short time, right? Like people might put all their stuff in airplane mode and be like, no, for two weeks. And you know, when things open up, that might not be the best time to schedule your virtual event. But in future, you know, there's a way to do something in person and offer people who need to be at home, who can't be there, to access it, to mimic the experience of folks are having in person, or to offer something different that's exclusive for the folks who join you virtually from far away. I think all those things are real and are here to stay, and can add a lot of value if we choose to look at them that way.
That's great. Well, on that, we'll open it up to any questions you all have there on the line. So if you want to chat those questions, easier for you to just mute and ask, but we'll save a few minutes here for that, and then possibly hop off a little early, because I've been told people will be excited. So any questions?
Earlier on, I saw a question from Lauren, and I don't know if Lauren is still on here, but was asking about what did we do differently in terms of digital appeals to get 200 registrations in 4 days. And so we did some things that were in normal CE voice, the things that we normally put on social media, just sort of saying like, this is happening, and posted multiple times across multiple platforms. But one of the things that we also did was we asked the young people who are going to be on the panel to make a video to say, we're inviting you to join us, right? And so it felt a little different because everything else was sort of like text, but then you have this video of this young person making a personal ask, and we feel like that had some that had some influence on what we saw.
That's great. We also had a question about, and Devin, you talked a little bit about the Sphere platform, but when thinking about the fundraising aspect of some of the events you all have done, just how people actually gave. Like we've seen some people use text to give for the first time. We've seen some people, click out, go somewhere else. A couple of platforms out there beginning to offer kind of a one-stop shop for it. But just how were folks encouraged to give if they wanted to, kind of practically during your events?
I think that it kind of depends on some of the historical part of your event too. So did you have an event, if it was $150 to attend in person before, and you don't want to lose that momentum and you want to plant that in someone's mind about gift level, what can you do? So we paid a meal forward to a family. We've talked about the good food that we typically have at an event. We talked about the loss of getting to see each other in person, but pivoted it into a way that did good. And it was also back to right to the people that we're all trying to gather for, right? And that's what it's about. So I think that you can do that. And then there's also like giving people an out, I think is great. Like, can you donate and not attend? Like, so for some people, like they were like, here's my donation and have a great, and they could write a message. So that was the one thing I loved about Give Butter. Everything lived on one page. So if someone couldn't attend, they could make a donation, leave a really great encouraging message. And then when we had our opening credits, I played a lot of those messages for people that weren't even at the live event, really trying to bring that spirit into the whole evening. And I think that was really nice. I really enjoyed that part of the platform. It was Give Butter. Someone's asking, BUTTER. Yeah, it's great. And there's a lot of other great platforms out there too that people are using that are similar. So that for us, having everything live in one place, from that first ticket sale or donation to the very end of the live appeal, I think made the whole experience feel cohesive. When that was part of that, could feel just kind of fragmented if you're not attending live.
There were two things that came out from this conversation today that I think are worth highlighting here. One is what you said, I think, Devin, about when people have to click away from your event, that's a danger point. So anything you can do to avoid that experience, I think is really helpful. So whether it's that your donation form pops up within your event, which some platforms will allow you to do, or that it's all integrated into one place, or that it's text to give, like that's a knowing your audience situation for sure in terms of what's going to resonate. But if you can keep people with their eyes on you, that's ideal, preferable, and that's definitely a difference maker. And there was a second thing that has gone all the way out of my head, so I'm sure it was great, and I will let you know when I remember what it was.
Great. Any other questions from the audience in the chat, or if folks want to unmute and ask anything?
I remembered while we're waiting.
Great.
I knew it would come. A bunch of you pointed to the fundraising lift that happened before the event. And I think that is a thing that is more true in virtual spaces, is that it is harder to mimic the energy. Like there is an energy in a room when an appeal happens or a fund in need or even an auction that's harder to mimic online in the moment. And it feels like, just like anything else you do live, it feels very risky. So I would put emphasis on doing the vast majority of that lift before you show up in the room. I think there are some events that have been very successful at fundraising in the moment for a host of reasons. But largely, I think that's a truth to hold on to and to plan for.
Great. With that, I think we're going to go ahead and wrap up. So thank you all for being with us today. Thank you, panelists, for sharing your experiences with us. Hard to believe we've been doing this for a year now, but appreciate the learning and advice from it. And we'll send out the recording for those of you all that maybe had to leave a little early today or joined a little late. So thank you all, and have a good day.